Welcome everybody. Just to let you know who's in our panel today looking at interoperability and standards and whether they're appropriate for delivering that. On the end there is Simon Truby, who's Director of Communication Workplace Services at Ricoh UK. Next to his right is Gabi Shriki, Senior Vice President, Head of AV Business at Valens. To his left is Rob Moody, Sales Account Manager at Matrox. And to his left is Justin Kennerton, who is President of the SDVOE Alliance. I can't read out what I've written here. It's like an old person reading a list of people, isn't it, really? I do apologise. However, there's lots to talk about standards and everything else. The latest chestnut is interoperability and what we're going to do about it, whether it's deliverable or whether the industry can cope with it. But when you think about standards, they're there to encourage or support interoperability. But true interoperability, I mean, is that possible in the AV world, or are we being too optimistic? Justin.
Well, what does it mean? I mean, there must be a limit to interoperability at some point. My printer doesn't work with my coffee maker, for example, right? But within reason, within things that need to work together, yes, we can achieve interoperability. SDVOE has achieved interoperability across 50 manufacturers. HDBaseT has achieved interoperability across their more than 50 manufacturers. So I think the question is how do we drive that interoperability? How do we make, to me, I wonder if you agree with this. Let's start with someone we can agree with maybe. A challenge that I have is sometimes getting the manufacturers to want to buy into an interoperability story, because they say, well, but I don't really want his to work with mine necessarily.
Absolutely right. I think, as I said earlier in our pre-recording session, the market is a bit schizophrenic about standards and interoperability. So on one end, they really like the idea of being standard, interoperable, driving the cost down. But when it comes to real-life installations, if their box is solving the problem customer present to them, they don't care about the rest. So there is willingness to drive standards, but realistically, in many cases, they don't want to go there. I still think that as an industry, we want to drive standards. I think HDBaseT, SDVOE is giving some standardization, giving interoperability, but as Justin just said, you can't assume interoperability between all technologies. You have to choose the right technology for your right problem. There's no silver bullet, unfortunately.
Is it a question of perception then, really, when people see standards, they automatically assume that anything with a label that says we conform to a certain standard immediately induces the idea of interoperability? Or we think
they do, and rightly so. If you are labeling your product with a certain standard, it should be interoperable within that standard. I mean, there's no
within that standard. That's the point.
Within that standard, it must be. If it's not the case, then it's definitely not even a standard. Open or not, it's not a standard.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? Just as a manufacturer point of view, I mean, are the manufacturers themselves playing a bit of a game here by they're saying, well, are they keeping their hands too close to their chest by saying, well, we have our own agenda here. We want to be promoting our own stuff, and therefore is interoperability quite the thing? And is that going to be a good thing and everything else? Or they've been forced into a corner, do you think, Rob?
Well, I think the horses for courses analysis, and that's right for this need, is of course right, and that's brought us into an almost silo mentality, and I think the idea of being able to say, well, hey, couldn't we get HDBaseT to talk to SDVOE is the sort of the next evolution of this, and have a sort of an enabling standard like IPMX that is trying to bring everybody into the same party and get that bigger interoperability that is actually the goal, not for the manufacturers, but for the users who are all of our customers in that sense. So they're the ones who want to be able to plug the boxes together. And yeah, I've always been doing this HDBaseT, but oh crikey, now I need to do that. And I can't. So to be able to say, yes, we're interoperable on a bigger scale is I think, something that is
It's like asking Turkish to vote for Christmas, isn't it? You know, you're there, an end user is not really bothered about having different standards there. All they want to do is the thing to work and plug into whatever configuration. I mean, talking to Simon, the cost of not planning in, you know, correct connections between devices is incredibly enormous, expensive mistake. And we know with AV, things get planned in last and not really at the beginning of what is the need what's your need, what you need to do it, and so on. That doesn't happen very often, does it?
No, and I think that's the thing. There's two questions around that. There's the interoperability at the design phase, and there's actually what you're trying to achieve as a customer, and that's the managed service, the piece of it constantly working. And I think that's the key bit about interoperability and the standards-based approach to it. I think from our experience and what we've been asked for is that customers want to be able to manage solutions in the same way. It doesn't matter then when they develop a room today, it might be with a HD-based T solution, or tomorrow it might be with an SDVoE solution, because of the need of the localized requirements gives it that requirement. What they're actually looking for is being able to have a team that can support it in a big way, and actually, if a device fails, how can we swap that out easily? And it may be that there's not availability due to equipment shortages or what they've got on the shelf at that point. I think the interoperability has to be based around what you're trying to achieve from it, and it not necessarily always being about the core deliverable of the room or the system, it being around actually what does the customer need? And the customer needs to have high availability of their rooms. They need to be able to see what's going on with it. They need to be proactive in maintaining it. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're seeing that customers are looking for. They want the equipment to play nicely together so that they know that they can turn around to their customers, bearing in mind it's internal customers for them, and say, really sorry, but this is what we're seeing. This is how we're managing it. This is the proactive work we're doing, because they want to get a functionality out of the system day one from design, but longer term from maintenance. And that's what we're seeing.
Unfortunately, even on the management level, on the control level, there is no standardization today.
That's
right?
the problem.
I mean, you guys have your own, we have our own. Customers do their own version of that platform management, and this is maybe, I think it's more realistically for this market to try and work on that control and management standardization than on the core transport technology.
I think that's the hidden value.
That's what I was hearing and what you're saying. Like at the end of the day, the difference between us is architecture, right? Do I want an AV over IP solution, or do I want a matrix switch kind of solution? And those decisions have nothing to do with interop or manageability. Those decisions have to do with how are you trying to achieve something. What you're saying is where the customer ultimately cares about interop is at that higher level, is at the management level, right? Is my matrix switch working? Is my AV over IP working?
Yeah. And then can I have one platform to watch the lot,
Right.
manage the lot?
Now that said, I think there's still value once you get down to that lower level, because supply chain is a huge thing to talk about these days, right? If I've got let me just make some names. If I've got an Atlona matrix switch and I just can't get a new HD-based T receiver for it, I can go buy an Extron receiver and plug it in at least, and know we're going to be okay. So there is value at the connectivity level for interop for sure, but it's interesting to hear the perspective that that's not where it's the most important.
No, and ultimately for integrators and things, that's also a challenge as well. Not just the end user. How do I maintain multiple end users with different solutions as well? And that's where some standards into the reporting, the information, the way that you view that, how can you remotely diagnose challenges? That's quite a key thing. I think that there is a lot of value from the interoperability between what the platforms may be, but also the standard as to how are you going to provide that information.
I actually want to add, if you don't mind, one more thing. On a transport level, never mind AV over IP, HD-based T, or any other form. As long as there is a commitment from the technology provider for interoperability between its products, that's very important for the industry. There are well-known Taiwan-based AV over IP solutions that are not interoperable between the different generation of the product they bring. And that's a disaster. At least on SDVoE, HD-based T, we maintain backward and forward interoperability. That's very important.
That's the conception, isn't it? The fact we've been going for remote connectivity to hybrid working and everything else, suggested that really it's connectivity that people assume can be done easily, but interoperability, it sort of suggests proper working collaboration and everything else. And I do feel that's caught everybody on the hop. It's not just anybody can just about communicate with basic connectivity over various levels, but it's the much more complex requirements of interoperability to do with applications of various other systems working in the background to seamlessly connect. Now, IT have been hassling, working with that dilemma for years, haven't they? So it's unfair to dump it on the AV world.
I'm not sure that the IT solved that. I'm using Teams today and I want to talk with a user who uses Zoom. No interoperability there. So I think the interoperability problem resides even in the IT, even in the IP-based domain. It's a matter of, I think we are serving, at least our alliance, HDBaseT Alliance, serves the AV market very well, and I think SDVOE is trying to do the same, maintaining interoperability between the generations, building on top and not creating discontinuity, right? Yeah. We work on that very hard, and again, I'm telling you from a design, from a chipset vendor. Valens is the chipset vendor for the HDBaseT product. We carry a lot of legacy inside our silicon to support backwards. It costs us, and we still do that, and we think that's important to do.
Okay, well, let me put it this way then. When all this was created, we created the standards that we call them standards that we now go by. Where did everybody think this would eventually lead? More and more people committed to certain standards and ways of working and everything else. We must have realized at some point that there would be an overall arch to merge everybody together and have an overall a way of operating in relatively similar systems that weren't wholly compatible, but were more or less there within certain applications. Where do we think there's always going to be screaming out, especially in the audio world, for a universal interface, but who would produce it, that would then say we could just plug and mix and match everything we like, just plug it in this installation, which is what everybody wants. But we've been racing towards this point where now where do we go? Where does everybody go with developments? Where do you go? Where do you go?
Yep. I have my opinion.
What's the next step? Yeah, but it's still going to be conflicting no matter what opinion you have. There's going to be there's not going to be at the moment any kind of agreement to this at some point this common path appearing.
And I think one of the interesting things that pulls that together is if we're looking at I want to pull that device out and put that device in, and how are they going to get there? It changes the way we look at the definition of the scope from the very beginning. So we're not saying I want to move this output number 3 of that device through this bandwidth to there. We're saying I want that audio output over there, and let the system in the middle take care of it. Having a standard, an organisation, an infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, that is capable of delivering that simplicity that works for the users and the integrators and the manufacturers, that says, okay, yeah, we put our device in, the infrastructure has said, oh, I can see you've got an audio output, I'll make a note of that, as Bruce used to say, and you want it over there, now you want to switch it to there. Fine, let the system take care of it. Let's not make it an IT quagmire. Let's make it easy, because that's what they want. They don't really care about how it happens.
And
they want it to happen.
Here's where I think IT is way ahead of us. Yeah, okay, they've got Teams and Zoom problems in interoperability. Meanwhile, is that an IT problem or an AV problem? I don't know. That might be us too. But your example of, I just want audio from here to there, I'm thinking of how USB works, right? Somewhere in that standard it defines there's a device that's called an audio device. And here's how audio devices work. And now you can build your audio device to do special things. I'll build mine to do special things. But then I plug it into the PC and it just knows, oh, I can get audio from here. And we're not there, SDVOE kind of works like that. HDBaseT kind of works like that. But there's some way that we're not quite there yet, and I don't see that there's use in a world where, say, an HDBaseT talks to an SDVOE, because what does that mean? Like I said, our difference is architecture, not how do you connect them.
They can interface over the HDMI. So I think that at the end of the day, It's not really a realistic assumption that there will be one day a single technology that you will unify everything. I don't think it's going to happen because everyone is trying to solve different problems. It's a different issue if I want to solve a meeting room or a huddle room versus solving a large venue like a big stadium, right? And for that problem, you need solution one, and for the other, another solution. As Justin was hinting on the Microsoft OS, if the most dominant platforms in the world, the Google and the Microsoft, will adopt a certain way of doing things, this will accelerate adoption in a centralized standard or more unified standard. Before that, I don't see this really happening. Now, the way the market is trying to solve it today is by bridging. So I can make a large system, and portion of it will be with HDBaseT, portion of it will be with SDVoE or IPMX. There will be bridging technologies between different technologies, which makes sense. And I'm not sure it's a bad thing for the industry. In my mind, having the right technology for the right problem is actually serving better the end customer than forcing it with a single technology.
I think there's a risk, and we've seen it with even things like USB, like you say, as a standard. If we go down a defined specific standard too quickly, we lose the R&D and the development that you guys are all doing. You've all got your own unique piece, and we go into USPs being around hardware and not about actually what's the right way to deliver the solution for the right application. And I think yes, we'll end up with playing nicer together, and we'll get some development there. But you all need to develop your standards and your technologies in your own way, because it adds value that way as well. It's just about the end piece, which is what we're trying to achieve by all of it as an industry.
And there's certain market dependencies as well. So obviously, you're not going to go anywhere until there's volume, because you've got to have volume to make an ASIC worthwhile. And yet, by the time we get there, obviously, you add a lot of value in that ASIC.
Just to be clear, our ASIC's been shipping for 2 years, but,
yeah.
But yes, it takes volume, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. If there wasn't volume, you wouldn't have done it.
Right.
Right. Matrox made ASICs as well.
Yep.
Yeah, we understand that. So without volume, there's no ASIC, and it's got to be FPGA. But in the launch period, there isn't volume. Mm-hmm. So what you're going to have is a plan that will get you to the volume.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that IPMX is delivering, the ability to say, hey, we can get from there to there without going back to HDM or HDMI or whatever as the common currency. If you've got a good plan, then the journey's going to be good. Yeah, it's not going to be a quick journey. Yeah, it's good to see. You're not going to get all the passengers on board until you've got the whole journey mapped out. So I'm confident that if you map out the difficult stuff, the easy stuff will follow. And the broadcasters have spent years getting to ST2110 to where it is. These sort of standards don't happen overnight. We're all agreed that, just like designing ASICs doesn't happen overnight. But it maps out the way, and I think we can learn from what they've done. We've added in our own AV bits into what comes into the IPMX standard, the HDCP and so on. That's the EDID, that are all AV sort of.
But Rob, learning from others' experience is a good thing, but sometimes can deceive and put us in the wrong direction. I think the SMPTE2110 solved a specific problem for the broadcast and has done a good work for that. There's a lot of adaptation that will need to be done on IPMX to serve better the AV market.
Absolutely, it's certainly not a done deal. That's for
Can
sure.
you just explain what IPMX is and where we're going with that? It's not a standard, is it? But it's developing into a way ahead, if I can put it that way.
That's right. Yeah. So Matrox is quite involved, so I guess I get a bit of an insight into that. So it's effectively taken that ST2110 work that was produced some years ago now, and saying how can we evolve that into other markets? And IPMX is the evolution into the AV market. There are other markets. There's another evolution going into military, another evolution going into the medical world. But they're using those techniques that have been developed, and the common need, if you like, was lots of different video formats and lots of different audio formats, which is the broadcaster's whole reason for being. And IPMX is trying to provide that sort of aggregation, the meeting point for all the different standards to come together and say, you know what, we can send it over there without going back to baseband. And that's a lot of quality saving, a lot of time saving, and potentially money saving. And with the volume, you get to save even more money with the ASICs that you put into it. The start is exactly the bridging that you were talking about. Is that where you wanted to go, Clive?
Well, I want to go to a place where it explains clearly what we're about. That's where I'd like to go. Yeah. I mean, if I was a buyer listening to this, I'd still be a little bit unclear about where the whole thing is going. I mean, it seems a never-ending path that clearly is pointing in the right direction, but one doesn't see an end to it. And I think this has been going on for a few years now. I applaud the work that people have done. But if I was planning 5 to 10 years ahead with mixed installation, especially where we are now with the pressures that have brought the market 5 years ahead right down to the present day, and I was mixing and matching technologies which are more AV than IT into my current mix. I mean, look at where Teams is going. I mean, you're going to have Teams as part of the core Microsoft environment that's going to be much bigger and very much more UC based than it ever was. We know how good Microsoft is developing code and keeping it up to date, which worries me slightly. But that's going to be one massively proprietary environment everybody has to plug into and develop according to what they're doing. I still think it's a major future for Zoom, and we've tried to promote that, and it is. Zoom is by a long shot not dead in any stretch of the imagination. But that we are ironically going towards a big Microsoft environment rather than one that offers true choice and interoperability to everybody else. So that, in my mind, is as a corporate buyer, wanting to incorporate what I see as quick thinking on the foot, trying to incorporate the stuff that I hadn't accommodated before now, with different requirements technically, into what is a traditional IT environment. I'm now having to think twice about developing. Where do I go? This is new territory for a lot of people, and they're seeing relatively conflicting developments that don't quite fit into their current IT planning and thinking. That's what worries me.
I think you're right. I think you're seeing applications that are around the periphery of the infrastructure that we've been talking about, and ultimately they want their applications to talk to each other through the infrastructure. So phase 1 is making the infrastructure talk to each other. Phase 2 is the applications that are outside the infrastructure talking to each other. It's like the different layers in the ISO model, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, Clive, if I had a crystal ball 10 years from now, more or less the same like now. I think that you mentioned Teams and Zoom, they will dominate the meeting room use case or market. They will dominate the corporate meeting room. I don't see them in control room, I don't see them in signage, I don't see them in professional audio. So I don't think everything will end up being distributed by Teams or Zoom, right? It makes no sense. This industry is too diverse and has so many different use cases to solve, which one platform can't solve it. So I think that in 10 years from now, we're going to have a similar solution like now, where we have multiple different standards that solves very well a specific problem. Mm-hmm. And we'll see system level vendors, system level integrators who knows to take advantage of each of the benefits of each technology and combine them together. The ones that will be able to do it well will be the best, will succeed most.
And I think that comes back to my first point, which is actually, why would they care? Why would they buy into a particular technology today and worry about it in 5 years' time? They've got to look at their actual application that they're trying to achieve at that point. And as we were saying, it could be that their current project is an SDVOE one. The next one might be a HD-based T based on the needs of that location and that office, that infrastructure, the other influences that are in there. The key thing is that actually they can support it in the same way, and it doesn't affect the user experience, which is, I have an office, I get to use the office, I can book it and it works. That's what they're looking for. The minute that you lose that control, you lose perception of what the products can do and how reliable they are. And I think that's why we've seen effectively, manufacturers joining on to multiple platforms, multiple capabilities, because that opens up the field of, I don't now need to choose one manufacturer for all my offices over the other. I can pick from a number of manufacturers and solutions around what I'm trying to achieve for that one site or that one, maybe an event space or something like that, and change it depending on what they're trying to do. We have seen lots of mass deployments, so that's a different requirement to then looking at your larger auditoriums and your theatres and things, where you're looking at better audio quality or different inputs or broadcast even, where you need it within those environments.
I mean, I can see the two things there, as you're saying. It's a rethink about your existing technology and how effective it is for the use you're putting it to.
Yeah.
But looking at quite a few digitisation projects we've gone on for a year and a half we've featured looked at 2 features about current things going on. Looking at the people now heading companies, I mean, Kramer, top guy there, is a former IBM digital transformation guy, for example. That's just one example.
Not anymore.
He went, did he? I am behind the times, am I not?
He's a new guy.
He was digitally transformed recently.
Very nice.
He's
I love his quick thinking.
He's a new guy, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope that's not a great sign about digital transformation. Or was he not an effective?
They are going significant transformation as a company. I think that they will do well in the future.
Okay.
But
the point I was
XCO is out.
Okay.
Yeah.
The point I'm making is that it's not just looking at infrastructure and everything else. It's people being forced to look at how the company actually works and how it can work effectively with everything else. Now, inevitably, you have to look at the infrastructure you're providing, and are they having to look at it differently? And if so, Teams and Zoom is just one element of a much larger organisation. You're looking at it much more holistically, looking at the way you work and operate, and whether you want to, make your business work in a different way to how it was pre-COVID, if that's where it went to.
Yeah.
And then how that divests itself in how you invest in your current infrastructure. I mean, companies are very bad at managing infrastructure. Now, with the complication of cloud and everything else, you've got all these added elements of segmentation within the infrastructure. It's very difficult to manage.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm amazed that CIOs haven't waded into this argument, actually, because it's very much to do now. It's AV and everything else to do with it has been elevated into a much more core position within the infrastructure debate that really is at CIO level, yet it's not being recognised as such, which staggers me, I'm afraid, having interviewed so many of them. And we're still at the AV level, and people don't realise how strategic and important the effect, the functionality this technology delivers to people. And therefore, first question on my lips is, where does it fit, and how can we get the most out of it within the infrastructure we're developing and adapting to accommodate new stuff so it works seamlessly with everything we've got installed already? As a CIO, that's how I would be thinking.
And that's it. It's it's the wider discussion about the workplace and the utilisation. And as you were saying, actually, we've been elevated because it's a necessity. AV solutions and meeting room technologies, they've now become not just part of the workplace. They've been the reason to go to the workplace, to go and collaborate into a room and then work seamlessly with everyone else.
It's an environment in which
it's an environmental thing and a workflow
change, isn't it?
Yeah. And the impact on the influencers that actually, I wouldn't say that we took for granted before, but actually were there in the background that you could leverage, but we weren't as close to in the past, like you say, cloud infrastructure, the physical infrastructure. We need to be absolutely driving that, because there's a massive impact on how we deploy, what we're asking for when we're talking to the infrastructure designers and making sure that that's there. But also the impact on the environment as well. So suddenly if we start increasing the demand on the network, is there enough capacity for the fact that actually now people are returning to the office and doing Teams calls from their desk, as well as using the meeting rooms to do that. And nobody quite knows how that's managed and how to encourage that correctly. Yeah.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Managing the net. I mean, it's amazing how when we have a problem, we focus on certain elements of it rather than keep the thinking holistic. Because I think we're into a new phase now where everything has a knock-on effect, and you can't just think of one piece of technology, even though we are focused in our own particular areas of AV technology. Well, now we're in a new position for the AV industry in which we are so now potentially totally interlinked with everybody else. We've never had that situation before. And you then have to ask yourself how capable the integrators are dealing with the problems that they traditionally love solving, because we all like a problem to solve that's simple and doable and involves getting a quick fix to and everything else. It makes it infinitely more complex and difficult to handle. And you said, do we have the skills, and B, do we have the capabilities and companies that can think in a bigger world outside their own to be able to fix these problems? That's what I call potentially global support. So I've never felt we've had. We might operate on a global scale, but that's not the same as providing global support to a company with a much bigger digitization difficulties.
I think this is exactly the reason why the solution architecture and the integrator really needs to understand the problem it's trying to solve and use the right technology to solve it. Because if you're trying to force a single technology to solve different problems, you will just complicate things more than you should. If you're doing multiple rooms in a very large corporate environment, it makes a lot of sense to use HDBaseT within the room and use sort of AV over IP between the different rooms if you don't want to rely solely on Zoom or Teams. If you would have tried to do everything AV over IP, the installation cost and the maintenance to do that is complex and high cost.
It's about understanding that. That's
Exactly.
I think that's the development of the AV integrator.
Yes,
is understanding what's influencing your design, but where you can then create issues for other areas of the business and other pieces as well. And without that knowledge and that understanding of the whole environment, that creates a huge risk.
See, that's the nub. No one disputes, and everybody respects what you've all done and what everybody's achieved with it. It's a question of being clear enough to indicate where it's best used and where it would. I feel that sort of communication thing has been sort of missing, even though you're so articulate and good communicator about what you do. The overall picture has been that there's still very much a lack of clarity into where these sit, especially at the beginning of the thought and decision-making cycle, where these elements should be absolutely written into stone. If you want to do that, you have to do this. If you want to do that, you need to do that. This is where we're at the minute. Now go and think what you want to do. Because these are the things you need to have in place. Right. Doesn't seem to be that thinking, does
Maybe
it?
one of our next panels should be in front of architecture, solution architecture and installers, not
exactly.
manufacturing
That's what we tried to start
oriented.
to do, in fact, get the fit out and the architect, who are much closer together than they realise, actually, I hadn't realised, is to get those two perspectives going, and we've already started doing that on some subjects. And I think we'll have something planned later on where we can get people, you're getting the right people in the room to be able to communicate. Architects are very different beasts from what they used to be. They know they have to, they're designing the infrastructure and the buildings, they have to accommodate especially the property world is going through turmoil at the minute. With architects saying and property developers saying, how are we going to make money out of our spaces? And architects saying, well, okay, who are much more technically qualified and appreciative of the differences that need to be in the buildings, but they are down to their clients specifying up top, from top down, what they need in there, and they have to be briefed. It's this communication has to be working in sync, especially on the big builds, where you do find the consultant, the builder, the architect very much on the same level, but it's not on every sort of development, unfortunately.
They're having to, because actually it's not a question necessarily about the space, it's the workflows
And the regs
now.
and
So,
everything else, yeah.
so you have to build now when you're looking at the, as you say, the property and the space and the office and the brief from the C-suite isn't just about we're moving, we're relocating. That might be the initial driver because of lease, but actually it's about how can we leverage the space, how can we leverage the workflows, how can we develop our capability as a business through what you're all designing, whether that be the heating, lighting, the energy efficiency, whether that be the actual flow of the workspace, whether that be the spaces you provide within there, and then obviously the technology that supports all of that. And it really drives, it almost, as you say, architects are now becoming workflow consultants rather than just space designers, and understanding the technology. It's a real collaborative piece that's coming together there, I think, that drives that.
Following on from that, we've lived through a period where, we're in a different world now. We've got to do something different, and the folks have done the Pareto analysis and said, well, if we can get this much done, the business will still be afloat. And we've done very well deploying the Teams and the Zooms and whatever else. But now people are revisiting it, looking at the 20% rather than the 80%, and saying, oh yeah, well this is very good for the video, but we're not actually seeing the spreadsheets in the detail that we used to when we were all together. Can we do that? So, oh no, that you can't do it like that. You've got to do it like this. And all of a sudden we're into a different technology, and that's where the nearly compressed and the uncompressed start to add their value, talking between even rooms in the same building. Well, you've got to send it a different way, and that end user need has taken you back into the how's it going? What's the technology that's underneath it? And that's I think the tripwire here, that we fall into the usual. This is the way we do it because it addresses most of the problems, and it's. The devil's always in the detail.
We as I spoke to you previously, we've done lots of roundtables and forums with end users, and we're still getting the C-suite want people to come back to the office because of the collaboration that you get from it. What they're finding though is they're struggling to generate the need to, because people have experienced life at home in different ways. Working from home, you're sat in front of the camera, you get a full view of yourself, you've got your own technology, you're collaborating with your own technology. We need to make the workplace as collaborative, as informed, but also flexible enough that says if you don't happen to be able to come into the workplace, you're getting the same experience. To a certain extent, if we're using what we used to do to continue the new world, when you go to the workplace, you have a worse experience than when you're sat at home. And that's what we've got to drive through the technologies that we're doing and the experiences that we're doing, to be able to create solutions that are it's involved for everybody that's in that meeting, because it's a UC meeting. And you get the collaborations from being in the workplace, from unintentional collisions. That's the key thing. It's the unintentional bit where you didn't intend to be with somebody, but you're collaborating because they're there and you bump into them. That's the bit that C-suite wants.
Yes. I was going to ask you how each of you as a company has coped with all this. Or have you changed your own way of working and thought differently about how your own internal processes work? Because that's what it's about, processes and effectiveness as well as technology. That we had that usual little quadrant, didn't it? People, process, technology, and something else, I can't remember now. It was always the thing that consultants used to pump out. Sorry. Gartner usually in a complete graph you never understood. Probability or whatever. Anyway, because I know as a publishing company, well, we're not, we've had to change the way we work, and radically, and it's been more people and everything else associated. And the thing that's cropped up every time is not the technology we use, but the experience of what we're giving our employees. Are they as effective as they were, and how can we improve that effectiveness? And we discovered two ways of getting the most out of them in the office, and it's very different work to the one they do remotely. And yet, people are saying, well, if the interface is better, then why would we need to come into the office? It's just as effective and more efficient. And I say, well, we still need people interaction, and this is why, because we define it more clearly than we would otherwise have done, which has helped us communicate better with our staff. But they have to feel confident that if they are working remotely, the technology is up to the job. And that, I feel, is where things break down, because we have one camp or the other. We get bogged down in the technology and everything else, forget what they've got at home and is it effective enough, and we forget what they're seeing and just assume they have what we have in the office. And it's a much more complex process of understanding the whole thing than it's ever been. Down to my next question, which is quality of service. Because now we're moving much more into a services mode, and we're having all this complexity managed more effectively, supposedly, with products that communicate as like an ISO level, eventually we'll get that way of thinking as I do, with the application compatibility and so on. You reach a point where, yes, I'm happy with it, but is the service actually producing what I need? And now we're moving into major service mode in the AV industry, aren't we? As the IT industry has been. Are we going to, this is going to be a major driver of providing quality of service and measuring it effectively. That's going to be the cul-de-sac we're going to drive us into, isn't it, ultimately, if the service thing goes on. So we can talk about standards and everything else. Ultimately are using what we're providing effective at delivering the right service, as you say, the experience that we need to provide what we need our employees to have. It's thinking above that level, isn't it, really?
So that
Sorry to throw a cat in the pigeon there, but or whatever it is. But anyway,
so that QoS way of thinking of stuff has taken us back to network again, really.
it is a way of thinking.
Yes.
Beyond the networking thing,
Yeah.
QoS was, but it's now looking much more business-oriented quality of service, because that's how do we measure how people are delivering what we're delivering with this complex variety. If we're looking at an integrator or a global provider, they're going to be judged on the quality of the service they enable. I wouldn't say provide, it's the wrong word, enable.
Absolutely,
that's
yes,
more
and that's the horses for courses that you were talking about, wasn't it? You've got to get the design right for what was needed, and think about how you're going to address that QoS. It's if we're thinking about the users, we're now thinking about the equipment that the users have got and how they're reporting what their experience is, because it's that changes the equipment.
Find itself way down at the standard level, like securities, for example, because people, security and quality of service are two of the main issues. Every time I have a conversation about this, suddenly security pops up, how exposed we are and everything else, and sooner or later, you need something like the standards level to drive that up, to make sure everything on top of that has people's confidence. It's going to provide ultimately a sound level of service for people who plug into it, and the appropriate level of security.
And the element that the standard brings in is getting people to do it the same way. Because if you can get them to do it the same way, then you can manage it. Yeah,
That's the key thing.
Yeah, it's one. If they're addressing QoS in one way and they're addressing it in another way, you've got to have that common currency in the middle. But if you can get them to all do it the same way, that's much better. The same goes for security. If you can close the doors that you don't want information moving through, and then okay, this is the corridor we've got. It's much easier to do your pen testing on that particular aspect because everybody's doing it the same way. It's much easier to address all the elements that they're looking at, the confidentiality, the integrity, the authentication, and so on, if everybody's doing it the same way.
I think this is part of the value that HDBaseT brings. If we look at quality of service and security, at the protocol level, both are addressed in a very good way with HDBaseT. We are in-room, no outside or inside. All packets has its own quality of service, queued properly, so all packets are delivered. But if we go beyond the protocol level, I think what we mentioned earlier is that serving the customer and having a satisfied customer is the key goal. And you need to work that and go down all the way to selecting your transport technology. If we are, and I repeat again, if we try to solve everything with one single unified standardized technology, we probably won't solve our customer problem properly.
We'll only collect some.
Right. Let's take as an example, if you try to solve everything with SDVOE or HDBaseT, highly uncompressed or slightly compressed, but high bandwidth per stream. Now, you talked earlier about having remote participants feel inclusive, right? We will very soon see within the meeting room multiple cameras, not one single camera, like we see today. So you have 4, 6, 8 cameras in your room, all of them streaming at a 10 gig HDBaseT level, 18 gig. Will the network's capacity suffice for that? No. It's going to be a big problem for the customer. He will need to spend much more money on upgrading his Ethernet connectivity infrastructure. So using the right technology for the right problem is the key. And the good solution architecture, the good integrators will have to be the one to take ownership on that. If they will rely only on the manufacturer recommendation, that will be a disaster.
And I think that comes down to how the different organisations roll out that sort of thing. Yeah, I have 1 gig at my desk. The engineers have 10 gig at their desk. It's horses for courses, isn't it? Within a given organisation.
And I think, as you said as well, it's like reliability and the solution working. I think it's become, within the office environment, it's become absolutely critical because you only get one chance at it.
Yeah.
You used to be able to manage it because you used to be able to have, well, that's the experience that everybody got. So they would measure based on, you know, your meeting rooms, and you were able to then manage support for those meeting rooms alone. They're now basing it on the fact of, well, if I sit at home, this is what I get. You know, I know how to reboot my laptop. I can cope with that. I know how I've plugged up my equipment. I know when it glitches and what I have to do to get it right. So I've made the effort to travel to the office and a meeting room fails and we haven't been proactive and we're not controlling that environment, or I'm struggling to operate it because actually, you know, we haven't touched on it, but usability even, you know, how easy is it to use hasn't been thought of, then already they're going, well, I don't like this, what's the point of going there? And that's the measurement now that users are using it for. You know, it's not. It's what are you providing? How do you maintain it and keep it going, and make sure that actually people aren't going to be disappointed by the experience? And that's quite a critical thing. I think it's become more. It's raised up that scale. And on the security front, I think that's something that probably hasn't been covered enough. And because we've been reactive into just providing solutions over the period of the pandemic and getting going again, we're now moving into a phase where people are being, I wouldn't say more proactive, but more realistic about longer term plans and what do I need to achieve from the solution from a security perspective? Where are my gaps? Where are my risks? And we are coming across customers that didn't realise they'd got security implications from what they've been doing because they've actually just gone ahead and fixed and put a sticky plaster over things to get them going, and now they're realising that opened up gaps and holes that we need to close in terms of security, and that's both on physical and applications as well.
I'm thinking of this analogy to 2019 we'd reached sort of peak ecological awareness, right? And let's get rid of all disposable plastic and don't use straws and everything. And then the pandemic hit, and it was like, screw all of that. I'm not reusing anything. I don't want to touch anything, And now maybe we're moving back to that world. I think there's an analogy here too. In 2019 and before, I think security was a very big issue, very front of mind for people. And then pandemic hit, suddenly just like hit the brakes. Like we got to just get Zoom everywhere, get Teams everywhere, just get this going. Yeah. And now it's time to take a breath and say, okay, well, but wait a minute. What's the societal cost of this, and how do we start patching that up again?
Very true. So what's the next stage of standards development? Where do we go from here?
Should we tell them about the HDBaseT SDVOE thing? Or? No, we'll announce that later.
I think that for us, we are very focused on developing products for supporting video conferencing, right? So USB 3 and multiple cameras in the room. How do we do that in a cost-effective, high-performing way? So this is the focus for us, to support the industry for, let's call it, video conferencing peripherals in general. So that's very important for us. And we work with others to have bridging solutions. So HDBaseT to IPMX, maybe one day HDBaseT to SDVOE, and allow the end integrators, end customers to use multiple technologies in the right way, combining them into a better solution.
It's quite a challenge you've got there, peripherals and everything else. I can't imagine
we like
how complex
challenges.
that is.
That's
My
what we
word.
like.
Is that your end game project, I suppose? Goodness me.
But,
Just,
I
hang on.
think that,
Rob.
Where we're going from now is we continue to make those bridging solutions exactly as you said, and we encourage the various different stakeholders to get involved in this and work together. It's the interoperability thing again, isn't it? Yeah. To get to the point that in the longer term, and we were talking about plans here, we've done the short term panic, got to do it now, quick get zoom in thing. Now we've got to say, where are we going? Where are the security implications? What has actually got to talk to what? What networks do we need where? And it's a much bigger plan, and that's going to be a slow-moving plan. And they keep taking those
Well,
steps.
it's going to have to be a bit quicker than slow, isn't it? Because the world's moving much faster than we anticipate, isn't it?
Well, let's see. The world will always move faster than you
if
want
customers
it to.
demand it, you're going to have to move
Yes,
down the side quicker,
yes,
aren't you?
yeah.
You know.
So it will be a piecewise, stepwise approximation. That's the IPMX is going exactly that way. The IPMX here at ISE, it's going to look different in a few weeks' time at Infocom, simply because a bit more is finished. The IPMX implementation that we've shown on the Matrox booth here, it'll be a completely different one on the IPMX booth at Infocom. Yeah, they're saying this is going to be a world first. Well, this was a world first, but they're taking another step.
Okay.
So I think we're at the point where we're seeing those changes happen quickly. We're bringing more people in. I think inevitably some of the weaker candidates in any ecosystem will fail as the balance changes. It seems to me that the balance is changing towards interoperability, and the ones who do their specific horses for courses well will continue to be, and those who perhaps haven't achieved the market success that they wanted to may not be here this time next year.
Well, that's all right, yeah. Last word, Justin. I regret saying that in a minute, but anyway, there we go.
What we're moving to in terms of our standards is some of the management layer and the monitoring layer that we talked about. So the SDVOE API is now completely open and downloadable. Anybody who wants can go to our academy and have access to that, and then build the tools on top of that that they need. I'm not expecting every end user, every integrator to go build their own custom tools. But what that allows is for the commercial software players in the world to come along and say, there's a need here. I want to build something on top of this. One of our new members, Excite, I think you're buddies with them too. They're working to solve this how do we manage between platforms problem, and they've, for example, leveraged our API and bring SDVOE to the cloud in that way. So for us, it's about not SDVOE having to solve all the problems that ProAV might have, but just making sure that our platform, that our standard is open enough that someone who needs a problem solved can come and solve it.
Brilliant.
Both SDVOE and HDBaseT are working with Excite to enable similar uniform control and management layer.
And I think just to add to that as well, we've talked about the support model and everything like that. What you've got to remember is, as integrators, we want to add value, obviously. We want to be able to offer these services, but we also don't want to commit a client down a route that means it can't transfer between suppliers, because that's the key thing as well. I mean, yes, we do. Of course, we want to make them sticky, but it means that we can't go and take over and improve the service of other customers that buy into that as well. So, it's a balance then, really, about that standardization of support, and the value add is actually how we address it. As you say, the tools that we build around it, reporting that we do around it, the tools that we use are critical, but the way that we integrate with the manufacturer's products is going to be the key thing to make sure we can achieve that. So.
Well, are the integrators themselves going to come up with pieces of environments that will do the job as well? Will they need to do that at a different level?
I
I do wonder.
I think there's some benefit to that, obviously, but the challenge with that is also that's a big R&D, that's a big support,
Yes,
and
I know.
actually we have to move with everybody then.
And they're being run by large funded groups now, which means they've got more of the cash to do it than they originally had. So it's possible.
Correct. Yeah.
I think the other thing is that the components crisis has shown us that, okay, that's what we use, we know it well, it does what we want, and we can't get it. Now we need a different brand, because they're saying they can't deliver till 2025, and we want it now.
But that's the value of HDBaseT and SDVOE. You use a different brand, but it's still interoperable. So I think the most important advice to end customers is, first, make sure you're involved in building your solution. Make sure you're articulating your problem properly, select the right solution architecture, work with them to identify how you're planning to solve my problem. And don't rely only on, okay, I'm going to go with this vendor or that vendor and their recommendation only. Once you're involved, you articulate your problem, most likely your system integrator will give you the right solution.
And actually, based on that, and this is a very good point. Actually, maybe the standard should be a design process, a bit like when you go into architecture and you have the RIBA standards as the phases of design. Maybe that's something the industry needs that would drive a way of solving the solutions first, then coming up with the product selection as a route to doing it. That might be the standard that's needed in the industry rather than interoperability standards.
That's an interesting thought.
There is actually, I saw on one of the, I don't know which publication, showed a startup company using AI in order to architect a large installation. Very interesting way. Yeah.
How very, this is a conversation for that day. That's fascinating. That's a whole new ball game, isn't it?
Yes.
How interesting is that?
Yeah.
What's weird is the AI said SDVOE every time. It was spooky.
Strange that. It's strange how this little brown envelope appears on the table.
It's actually, the AI is actually built on top of our API. I should have explained that. I'm sorry.
Just a direct email to you.
Don't be so desperate, Justin. Don't be so desperate.
They're one of your euphemisms, I know. Yeah. Simon, Gabby, Rob, and Justin, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.